Imagine you've just broken out of prison. Adrenaline is pumping through your veins as you evade the guards and their barking dogs. You find yourself in the middle of a dense jungle, and your heart is racing when you come across a raging river that is blocking your escape. In front of you are 3 bridges. The first bridge is solid and completely safe. The second bridge is old and shaky. Crossing it gives you a 50% chance of success. The third bridge is downright terrifying. It's barely holding together and it's inhabited by cobras. Your chances of crossing this bridge are only 10% at best. Now, which bridge are you choosing? The answer is obvious, but what if we add a twist? What if a detective is waiting on the other side of these bridges trying to predict which one you'll choose? What do you do now? Go. The safest bridge, the one you pick without hesitation if you were alone, suddenly becomes a trap. Why? Because the detective would expect you to choose it. It's a logical choice, so you reason. What if I choose the most dangerous one? The one with the cobras? You'd never expect that. But wait, he's a rational agent too, just like you. He can anticipate your reasoning, and he might guess that you'll pick the Cobra Bridge. So you think again, if he's expecting me to pick the Cobra Bridge, maybe I should pick the second bridge after all. But no, he could anticipate that as well, and suddenly you're caught in an endless loop of second guessing. He's thinking that I'm thinking that he's thinking that I'm thinking, and the only way you could surprise him is to surprise yourself. This is a non-parametric situation, a perfect example of how game theory helps us understand complex decisions. It reveals that most decisions in life aren't made in a vacuum. They're shaped by the constant push and pull of what others might do, what they expect us to do, and how we adapt in turn. Now let's dive deeper into what game theory really is and how it applies to real-life scenarios by exploring one of the most iconic examples of game theory, Prisoner's Dilemma. Here's the setup. A sheriff arrests 2 thieves after a heist. Unfortunately, he doesn't have enough evidence to convict them without a confession from at least one of them. So he separates them and puts them into different rooms, offers each of them the same deal. If only one of you confesses, they will go free, while the other person goes to jail for 10 years. If both of you confess, you'll each serve 3 years in jail. And if neither of you confesses, you'll both serve 1 year in jail for a lesser charge. Each one faces the same dilemma. If you assume the other person will stay silent, confessing gives you the best possible outcome. You go free. But if you assume the other person will confess, you're still better off confessing as well, because staying silent would give you the worst outcome, 10 years in jail. Confessing is always the safer choice, no matter what the other person does. This makes confessing the dominant strategy, and this outcome where both confess is the Nash equilibrium. Notice that the Nash equilibrium is not the optimal outcome. If both had stayed silent, they'd only serve 1 year each. Far better result, but without cooperation, they always end up here. Now, to understand the concept of dominant arguments a little bit deeper, let's explore another game. In this game, 2 players stand at a distance from each other, each holding a ball. They have 2 options at every turn: shoot the ball or take a step forward. If a player shoots the ball and hits their opponent, they win the game, but if they miss, they lose. Here's how game theory helps. If a player believes their opponent will not shoot in the next turn, the rational decision is not to shoot, because you could take your chances at a closer distance the next time is your turn. But if a player thinks their opponent will shoot, they must compare these two: the probability of hitting their opponent if they shoot now with the probability of their opponent missing on their next turn. Suppose the probability of a player hitting their target at distance 10 is 10%, and the probability of their opponent missing at distance 9 is 80%. Which one is the smarter choice? Clearly, relying on their opponent's 80% chance of missing is better than banking on their 10% chance of hitting. So up until a certain point, the dominant argument remains clear, no matter what your opponent might do: to not shoot. Game theory as an official field of study was pioneered by John von Neumann in the 20th century. Over the past 7 decades, it has transformed how economists, social scientists, and even biologists approach complex interactive situations. But the idea behind strategic decision-making aren't entirely new. Take Plato's account of the Battle of Delium. A soldier is facing an enemy attack and thinks with himself, if the army wins, his presence might not be essential. He risks dying without gaining any credit for the victory. If they lose, he is even more likely to die anyway. From his perspective, fleeing seems like the rational choice. And if every soldier reasons this way, the entire army flees and there's no one left to fight. Hernan Cortés, the Spanish commander who famously burned his ships upon arriving in Mexico, came up with this drastic solution. By eliminating retreat as an option, Cortés forced his men to stay and fight. From all we've understood so far, game theory tells us that sometimes rationality and logic points us away from trust and cooperation. Without Commander Cortés to burn our ships, it tells us to flee from fighting for your country, to betray your partner, and to drop our prices in order to cut off our rivals in the market. And yet, in reality, cooperation and trust do exist in our societies. How can this be? What allows people to work together? In a single-shot game of the Prisoner's Dilemma, we saw that the players were led to mutual defection, but when the same players expect to interact repeatedly, everything changes. One of the most famous studies on repeated games was conducted by Robert Axelrod. Axelrod set up a competition where different players, each using their own strategy, played the Prisoner's Dilemma repeatedly against each other. The goal? To find out which strategy would rank the highest. The results were fascinating. A simple strategy called tit for tat always came on top. Tit for tat operates on a straightforward principle. It starts by cooperating and then mirrors the opponent's last move. But why did it do so well? Axelrod actually found 3 common traits among the top performing strategies. All top-performing strategies began with cooperation, meaning they were nice. They punished defections immediately, meaning they were provocable, and they returned to cooperation as soon as their opponent did, meaning they were forgiving. Tit for tat embodied all 3 traits. But Axelrod also uncovered another critical factor. If players know when the final round will occur, rationality drives them to defect in the last turn, since there's no future consequence to fear. This logic cascades backward, leading to universal defection across all preceding rounds. This is the difference between finite games, where the goal is to win decisively, and infinite games, where the aim is to sustain play. But this still doesn't explain how cooperation emerges and thrives in our societies. Think about it. If tit for tat were to play against a group of defectors who always betray, it would lose every single time. For cooperation to succeed, there needs to be enough cooperative players in the population. Imagine a large population where only a small group of cooperators exists. These players are more likely to interact with each other rather than with the defectors. This allows them to accumulate points or resources, passing on their strategies to their offsprings and growing their community. Meanwhile, the defectors will drive each other into near extinction, but not quite. Some single defectors on the population's periphery may survive by preying on cooperators at the edges, forming small isolated criminal communities. So at an evolutionary level, the key isn't which strategies help players win in a single game. The critical factor is which strategy can be copied and passed down through generations, surviving the longest. This is what natural selection favors, strategies that ensure their own persistence over time, not just immediate victories. To wrap up everything, I want to leave you with this. Fostering cooperation does not require prioritizing the collective good over our own good. It simply requires extending our perspective to the long run, removing ourselves from the immediate present, and considering our own lives and those of the future generation from a more holistic view. And with this broader perspective, altruistic behaviors like those highlighted in Axelrod's study and favored by natural selection become rational.